It's getting recorded now. Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this day 2. So today, even though the schedule says it's a hands-on session, we will continue with the lecture and do the hands-on as part of the lecture itself. Okay. So again, today, so yesterday, second session for you was statistical preliminaries. This today is sort of continuation of that. We are still building on tools in area of statistics. These tools are fundamental for AI and ML applications. So tomorrow onwards, you will start seeing AI and ML techniques as such. Today, again, it is more of the building blocks, the alphabets we are building on which we can later on develop the techniques of AI and ML. Okay. So let me share my screen with you. So I hope my screen is visible to all of you. Okay. So today we are talking on statistical inferencing. In case you have any doubt or any issues, please feel free to stop me right away and ask your doubts. Don't wait till the end. I want this to be an interactive session. That's where the understanding is the most. And I also will be able to accordingly modify my style so that most of you benefit from this. Okay, so yeah, so this is what you did yesterday. We started this area of statistical preliminaries yesterday. Essentially, as I said, developing the foundations. Okay, namely, Professor Sharath talked about probability, random variables, and notion of probability density function. And also, he talked about moments like mean, variance, etc. How you can extract this summary information, moment summarize information about the random variables, how you can extract them from density functions. So these are the things he talked about. Some things he was doing when his lecture ended is he was talking about bivariate random variables. Most of the talk earlier was on single random variable, let's say just the height of a person. Bivariate, you have more than one random variables, let's say height and weight of a person, and you should be able to make joint statements about them. What is the probability of a randomly chosen participant having weight greater than 50 kgs and height greater than 6 feet? You should be able to give probabilities for such joint statements. So if you have the joint density function, that allows you to make such statements. Okay, so this joint density function characterizes the joint behavior of those two random variables. And from the joint, we can extract the marginals, which are essentially the density functions for individual random variables. So I think Professor Sharath did not cover the marginals, but I just wanted to mention that this can be done. So I am giving you information about height and weight. You can talk only of height or only of weight. That joint density has that information as well. This idea can be extended to multivariate random variables, okay, which is really the core of machine learning. We are dealing with several variables. Tomorrow's class onwards, you will start seeing this case when we look at various techniques in like regression or data reconciliation or principal component analysis, modeling neural network, classification, clustering, etc. You will see that we are dealing with several random variables, okay, not just one variable. So the ideas extend to the multivariate random variable case. You could have 10, 100, 1,000 random variables. In fact, all the big data, etc., which you hear in the news, in the media, it is dealing with large number of variables together. So essentially, the problems are multivariate in nature. Okay? So these ideas, basic ideas, can be extended. What you know of univariate or for bivariate, it can be easily extended to the case when you have more than two random variables. Okay, so what is this lecture about? So this lecture, we are still going to restrict ourselves to univariate random variable case. So one variable only. Whatever things that we learn, as I'm saying, they can be extended to the case when you have more than one random variable also. And today's lecture is about statistics. Okay, it's really about data analysis. So these are the three broad topics that we'll be covering: sampling statistics and their distributions, confidence intervals, and hypothesis testing. Okay, so as we go along, you will see what these are. Maybe some of you already have some exposure or some background in this, so please feel free to add your understanding whenever you feel like. That will help put things in a better way for all the participants. Okay, so far what you looked at yesterday was probability. So you talked, Professor Sharad talked about probability. So the idea is probability is like the maths part, mathematics part, or a model. So you have a probability density function. So it's like a model. So you say, oh, my random variable has a Gaussian distribution or a uniform distribution. That is my model. That using that, I can say something. What will happen when I toss a coin? What is the probability that I will get a head? Okay, so I have a model for how the coin behaves. That probability of head is 50%, probability of tails is 50%. So I can answer questions like, what's the probability of getting 2 heads in 2 tosses? Okay, so I have a model which is the probability density function. Using that model, I can describe what events I think will occur and with what likelihoods or with what probabilities, right? So probability is typically about prediction. Because I have this probability model, I can predict. If you follow the if you follow the crick info, for example, ESPN crick info, it has this win percentage. It keeps telling you at various points in time. 1 wicket fell and the win percentage goes down of the chasing team. Okay, so it tells you win probability is 50%, 40%. So it's essentially doing a prediction based on whatever models it has. So probability is about making predictions, looking forward whenever you're dealing with random variables. Okay? Just like in any engineering system. Okay, if I have a car or a reactor, I can say, oh, now my temperature of my reactor, this is how it will behave because I have solved some differential equations. I know it is going to increase at this rate for next 5 minutes. I'm predicting. Same thing we are doing here. We are dealing with random variables. We have the corresponding probability density function as their models. Okay, so we are predicting what's the probability that I will get a value of 2 or 10 or 50 or whatever, or what's the probability that I will win, lose, okay, true, false, etc. So in that sense, probability is mathematics. You can think of it as equivalent of solving the differential equations. If you give me differential equations, I can integrate and tell you how my temperature will behave. Same way, given a random variable, you give me its probability density function. I'll tell you exactly what's the probability of it taking a value greater than 5, less than 5, greater than 20, between 50 and 70. All such statements, I will give you the probability exactly, unambiguously, no ambiguity in it. Okay, so it is maths in that sense, mathematics, clean. You can do it cleanly. There are unambiguous answers. For example, I can make this statement that if I'm going to toss a coin, probability of getting heads is 0.5. That's a perfectly correct statement, right? So yesterday was about probability. What we will do today is where data will start coming in. So that is the area of statistics. So you hear these two terms, probability and statistics. Okay, so this is what broadly they refer to. Now, statistics is typically about looking backwards. I have now data. I have some given data. I want to extract rules from that data. Supposing I don't know it's a fair coin. Somebody has done an experiment and tossed a coin 100 times and got 30 heads and 70 tails. Okay, I have to build a probability model out of it. What's the probability of getting a head in a coin toss? So I have to extract rules or unknown parameters. What's the probability of getting a toss, of getting a head? That's a parameter. I have to extract that from the data. Now this is an art to some extent. How do you summarize data? How you look at data? Do you look at the average value? Do you look at the median? Do you look at the histogram, bar plot, pie chart, etc.? What sort of hypothesis you are testing? Is data sufficient in quantity for you to make an inference? So all these issues start coming in. What assumptions you make? Okay, so it's an art to some extent. Probability was clean. There are clearly well-defined rules, axioms of probability. You can follow them and you will not go wrong. Statistics, there is a lot of skill involved, experience involved, different situations. How do you deal? Which is the good statistic? Which is a good quantity to compute and to infer something from that? Okay, and so that's what I'm saying. It's an art to some extent. So as an example, you may not get exactly one head in 2 tosses. In truth, the probability of getting head is 50%. You have come from Mars. to earth, supposing you don't know anything about coin tosses, and no, somebody tosses a coin twice, he or she doesn't get any head at all, he gets two tails. What will you say? If you just look at data, you'll say, oh, probability of getting a head is 0, right? But that may be incorrect, because do you have enough sample size? What is the significance level? Is 2 tosses enough? Do you need to go for 10 tosses, 20 tosses? How do you make those decisions? So all of that comes under this area of statistics. So really, statistics is dealing with data. So it's a backward problem. Okay, it's like getting process data and trying to fit a differential equation to it. Okay? So there are many different equations you can fit. What's the best model that you fit? Fine. So today we'll talk mostly about statistics. Of course, these two areas are linked together. We use statistics to essentially estimate parameters of the probability density function, which are known as population parameters. Extract relationships about variables. So the model, there was a model which generated the data in the first place. That was the probability part. Now using the data, I want to say something about that model. Okay? And once I have that model, I can use that for my use that to my advantage. I can predict how certain system will behave in future, because now I have created that model. It's like I have understood it. Okay. In fact, if you see what is happening around us today, COVID, it's essentially the same problem. From data, people are trying to figure out how disease is spreading, how it's propagating, what is its severity level, and so on, so that they can use this resulting model to make predictions. Number of cases 2 months down the line, 3 months down the line, 4 months down the line. Okay, and you can see if you have read any of these modeling, that compartmental modeling approaches and so on, you can see that the success rate is not good, because we don't understand the model in the first place. What is generating the data? We don't understand the systems, the mechanisms, how humans are behaving, how this disease is spreading. So many of those model predictions were way off. Okay, so you get the data to say something about the model. Use that model to predict in the future. You go to the future, when the time comes, you get actual data, you compare. It does not match, you go back and refine your probability models. Okay, so this cycle continues. So it's exactly like fitting any if you have done some parameter estimation, estimated some heat transfer coefficient, mass transfer coefficient in chemical engineering, basically fitted some differential equation or some correlation. It's exactly that. From data, I fit a correlation. I use that correlation to predict some property. I do some experiment at that value. It does not match. I update my correlation. I say, oh, I need to have a different correlation. Let me modify it. So exactly the same thing we are doing. It is just that the underlying models are now probability models given by some density function. Okay, or some parameters of the density function like mean, variance, and etc. Okay, so as I said, today this preliminary session, or it's called statistical inferencing. So we are going to talk about what do we do with the data, how do we deal with it. Okay, yesterday was more about probability, the preliminary part. Okay, so there are these terminologies which are used: statistics, population, and sample. So statistics deals with drawing conclusions from observed data, as I said. Population is related to the probability density function. It is like the model. Okay, if you want to think in terms of numbers, think in terms of large collection of items that have measurable values associated with them. Okay, so it is statistics is I'm going to deal with 10 data points. 20 participants are there in this course. Based on those 20 participants, I make some conclusions. What will be the population? All possible teaching staff in the country. That's the population. If I could really survey them and ask them some question, that would be really telling me how the teaching community thinks of certain issue or behaves. But I don't have that. I'll just talk to 20 of you and make some inferences, right? So that's like a sample, a finite collection of items from the population that is observed, the 20 people in this class. The problem is, the typical problem in data analysis or machine learning is that we want to use these samples to draw inferences about population. Whatever I said about statistics and probability, think of probability as equivalent to population. Okay, and I want to talk to a few of you and draw inferences about that population. Yeah. Okay, so we sample, draw some conclusions about an entire population. Typical problem: in a reactor, I do 5 experiments, and I want to now say something about the behavior of the reactor at all times, and how it will behave over time, over several days, over different conditions, and so on. The examples are all throughout, everywhere. Very common examples, easy to relate, are, for example, exit polls. People want to predict which party won, how many seats. If you could ask every voter, you could make that prediction perfectly. You can't do that, so you just sample a few voters, and so it's like, no, you compute some statistics from those, and from those statistics you try to say, oh, this party is going to get these many seats, that party is going to get these many seats. Same thing about census. Or now the very contemporary topic is vaccine trials on volunteers, what we are hearing around us. Does the vaccine work? Vaccine of company A, company B work? How do you answer that? There are billions of people in the world. What is our population? There is a model which consists of which essentially will tell you what is the probability of that vaccine working on me or you. But for me to figure out that model very accurately, I need pretty much the entire population, right? That would be like, no, I have the forward looking part. If I knew the behavior, the response of each and every individual on this planet to a vaccine, then I can say, oh, I know the probability model. I don't have that. What are companies doing? They are getting some volunteers, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. So sample, look at the results on that sample. Okay, so you do some double blind test, give some placebo and give some actual vaccine and so on. And from that, make inferences. What is the probability that it will work on some person aged 60 years or above, 40 years and above, and so on, right? So they're simply trying to make sense of data. And that's why you have and that is a very, there is some art also involved. How do you set up your experiment? What sample size you choose? What quantities do you look at? So data has to be understood clearly, evaluated clearly before permissions are given for large scale deployment of any treatment. So we assume that the population can be described by a probability distribution, and we assume that the samples give us measurements following this distribution. Okay, whatever samples you have obtained are representative of the population. Okay, so what we want to do is using this. So as I said, statistics, basically whatever samples you got, you're computing some numbers based on those, but really you are not interested in just those numbers. You are interested in saying something about the population at large, the parameters of the probability density function. The probability density, think of that as the population, equivalent to the population. I want to really say something about that population distribution, the probability density function. What is the mean of that? Like the coin toss example I gave you. I toss a coin 10 times. I know how many times I got heads, but I'm not really interested in knowing that, oh, I got 4 heads out of 10. What will I do with that? From that, I want to make an inference that if I had tossed a coin infinite times, what is the fraction of heads I would have got, right? That's the probability of getting a head. Okay, is that, and we think that it is 50%, right? So really, I want to infer the parameters of a population distribution, mean, variance, proportion, etc. Okay. And to do that, we use a statistic derived from the sample data, like sample mean, sample variance, etc. Now the difficulty. So what is it? Why is it so difficult? Why can't I just say if I have 4 out of 10 heads, the probability of getting a head for this particular coin is 0.4? Why can't I say this? I can't say this because my outcomes are random in nature. The outcome of a coin toss is the random variable. If I repeat the same experiment 10 tosses again, this time I might get heads 8 times. What do I do? Will I say success probability, the head probability is 0.4? Is it 0.8? If I repeat it again, I might get 10 out of 10 heads. Is it 100%? Is it probability 1 of getting head? So how do I make these judgments, right? So I can't just look at the number. Oh, this is your sample average. If I want to find the heights, the average height of all the teachers in the country, I can't just look at 20 of you and whatever is your average height, say that this is the height of all the teachers, the average height of all the teachers. Okay? Because I pick a different set of 20, the number will change. So in other words, in our terminology, we say that statistic is a random variable. Okay, it depends on the sample that you have obtained, which will keep changing when you repeat the experiment. Note that when I'm tossing a coin, the coin is not changing. So its true probability of head, which as I'm saying, we think it's 50%, that is not changing. But the outcomes I'm observing, limited outcomes that I'm observing, limited data, the sample I'm observing, okay, based on that, whatever statistics I compute, the proportion of heads which I compute, that keeps on changing. So statistic is a random variable. Now from that, if we want to make inference about the population parameters, okay, the true probability of getting ahead, we have to understand how this random variable behaves. What is the density function this random variable follows? Okay, what are the parameters of its density function or if its distribution? So we need to understand about these statistics that we are computing, like the average, sample variance, okay, any other moment that you compute, median, sample median, etc. Okay, some proportion, some success probability, okay, some proportion of times you achieve some success. So we have to look at these statistics, understand their distribution, and then only we'll be able to infer something about the population parameters. Okay, that is what the area of statistics is all about, which is what we are going to briefly look at today. Yeah. Again, if there is any question, please feel free to stop me. Also, I request maybe Om Prakash that please keep track of the chat box. And
Yes, sir.
also, Om Prakash, let me know once it is 6:30 p.m. because I'm not looking at my watch.
Okay, sir.
So then then it's time for a break.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a typical problem. I understand that you are the audience is from a diverse background, but I have taken a problem in chemical engineering, but I hope you can relate to it. It's a typical problem that one faces. So there is some process, some product is being made using some catalyst B currently. Okay, currently catalyst B is being used. Now somebody in the company, some employee says, hey, I don't want to use this catalyst. Can I use catalyst A? I think I'll get more production out of it, right? So to answer this question, should I buy catalyst from company B or from company A? How do I answer that question? Will my productivity really improve? Will I make more product from the same raw material? Okay, so what do? We say, okay, let me compare the yields from the two catalysts. So yield is defined, basically you're saying how much product I will get, okay, from a particular reaction. So let's say we define this percent yield, and now my question becomes, really to answer this question, should I go for the new catalyst? I have to know that is yield using catalyst A greater than yield obtained using catalyst B? If the answer is yes, I will say, okay, let me go to catalyst A. Okay, so let's build upon this problem, very simple problem, but and we'll encounter many different situations. Okay, should you want to get a car with high mileage? Do you know that car B gives you high mileage than compared to car A? How do you know the answer? So you have to check their mileages, and if the mileage is improved, let's say you really care for it, you can go for the car with the higher mileage. So you have to make such a decision whether this holds or not. So what will you do? Okay, so we'll see that in the slide, typical data and what problems does it create. Such a simple statement, even to say this is correct or not, is not at all a trivial question. So let's say there are some economic considerations in the process. Okay, the people who are manufacturing this, company is manufacturing this, also wants the yield to be above 74.5%. Otherwise, the process is not viable for them. So surely you want the yield to be greater than 74.5%. For process A to be a viable alternative, at the barest minimum, they want that its yield to be higher than that for process B, which is what we wrote in the last slide. YA is greater than YB, and it should also be, of course, greater than 74.5. Additionally, just because YA is greater than YB, they will not shift. What if it is greater by a very small amount? They will say, then it's not worth the effort of shifting, because they will have to maybe redesign, change some of their equipments or their settings or their pumps or compressors and so on. So additionally, they say, I will shift to catalyst A, and the new process will be economically viable only if the resulting yield increase exceeds 2%. The difference between YA and YB should be at least 2%, right? So these are the considerations. So how do we solve this problem? What is in mathematical notation, what are we seeing? Okay, so let's say these are essentially the questions that we are trying to answer. Is YA greater than equal to 74.5 and YB also greater than equal to 74.5 consistently? Production is happening consistently. Maybe I'm doing it in batches. Every 3 hour, 4 hour batches, I'm making a product. Every 3 hours, I have a product. End of 3 hours, again, I have some product. Is my yield consistently higher than these thresholds? Is the yield from catalyst A greater than yield from catalyst B? If yes, is the difference between them greater than 2? Okay. How do we answer this question? We go and do experiments with catalyst A and catalyst B and analyze the data. Now, the moment we do that, we run into issues because the data has random variability. There's so many factors which are affecting our data. Okay. And we are only doing a limited set of experiments. To answer these questions using that data is non-trivial. So let me show you something like this is what I get. You see, we do some experiments, typical experiments. I think here, I don't know, maybe 30, 32 experiments each are done. You get the yield from the catalyst A, 74.04, one batch, next batch 75.63, 77.21, and so on. Similarly, we yield with yield with catalyst B, batch yield with catalyst B. You see, there is a spread, there is a variation. Okay, it is not a single number that I'm going to get for all the batches with catalyst A. It's not a constant number I'm going to get. Similarly, not for B. It's not a constant number. Sometimes I see A 74.04 is less than B 68.10, 75.75. Sometimes the value with A is higher, 75.29, 68.41. Okay, even if you do them next to each other, okay, the relationship might change. One is higher once, second guy is higher some other time. Sometimes the value can be very small, 68.1. Okay, sometimes it can be much higher, right? I don't know what's the highest value, maybe 78. Again, there is a range for B, there is a range for A. How do you make a decision now? Is YA greater than YB? Is YA minus YB greater than 2? Is YA greater than 74.5? YB greater than 74.5? Can I just say yes or no? How will I answer these questions? Right? So, so that is some of the observation that these questions, moment you start dealing with data, these questions are not so easy to answer, or one has to use some appropriate tools to answer these questions. And often you'll find that a lot depends on what assumptions you make. So the path you follow also determines your outcome. Okay, whether the assumptions are reasonable and not, that also affects your outcome. So first thing you note is that so YA and YB can take values on continuous scale. They can be 74.5, 74.6, and so on. So what we call them as continuous random variables. They are examples of continuous random variables. What is meaning of random variable? Every time you do experiment, YA changes, YB changes, right? So that's why they are random variables. You cannot predict what the value of YA beforehand, before you do the experiment. Okay, but maybe if you know its behavior, the probability density function, then you can say probability of YA being greater than 75 is so much. So really, it's about knowing that model. Okay. When we have that experimental data, of course, we don't know what that model is. We generated that data. So how do we characterize them? How should we think of YA, YB? So maybe I can talk of what is the mean of YA, what is the variance of YA, ask such questions. To characterize the behavior, I have a spread of YA values. Maybe I can talk of median of YA, mode of YA. Okay, some other quantity I can compute. The largest divided by smallest, largest YA value divided by smallest YA value. I can talk of the range, max minus min. I can do many things. I can characterize these batches by any statistic I want, right? So what are the most commonly used statistics which are valid or applicable in the most variety of scenarios? The commonly used statistics we would like to know. Okay, and then second comes the question of quantification. What is it that we are really trying to characterize or quantify? Is it that I am interested in one experimental outcome? I did an experiment with A and then with B, and A came higher than B. Is that what I'm interested in? Clearly, I'm not interested in one outcome alone, right? I am really would like to say that are there things such as true values of A and B? Really, if I could do the experiment perfectly with catalyst A, no other factor comes into play, no environmental condition, no human intervention, everything else remains identical, perfect, constant. Okay, I control everything, only just change the catalyst B to A. Okay. Then is there something called true value of quantity YA, similarly true value of quantity YB? If yes, really this is what I am after. I would like to quantify these, right? So this is, again, think of it like a population. If I could do infinite experiments with A or with B, probably I could figure out what is the true value of YA or YB. Okay, so I have to quantify, really it's the true value, is there, or does there exist a true value? And if yes, can I quantify it? Can I say something about it? Okay, and how should the characterization and quantification of YA and YB be used to answer the various questions that were raised? Okay. So typical problem in statistical analysis, this is what will come. A simple problem, just saying whether my yield increases as I go from B to A. I do some experiments and then boom, I run into these issues and I have to now figure out a proper sequence of steps, appropriate steps to follow to be able to answer some of these questions. Okay, some of these questions are actually not very easy to answer. Okay, they are involved and you have to make appropriate assumptions. But I'm just trying to motivate that why this problem is so important, that it arises all the time around us. Another example, if you look at this is an example of glass sheet manufacturing process. So there is a manufacturer who is manufacturing glasses, the type of glasses which we use in our buildings for windows. Okay. So key measure of product quality for that manufacturer is called as inclusions. It's an optical attribute, basically the flaws in a glass sheet. So number of flaws, number of, you can see the particulate, the grain size, the particle size exceeding 0.5 microns. That's a flaw. So how many flaws are there in 1 square meter glass sheet? Okay, that's a measure of quality of the glass. So there is a scanning device which actually scans the glass sheet and tells you what is the number of flaws in each square meter of the glass sheet. Okay. Now supposing there is again a batch, the glass sheets are being made of particular size, let's say 1 square meter glass sheets are being made, and what you see here is outcomes of 60 batches, 60 such sheets. The number of flaws in the first sheet was 0, number of flaws in the second sheet 1, third sheet 1, and so on. There are 60 values here. Okay. You can see that sometimes you get 0 flaw, sometimes 1 flaw, sometimes 2 flaws, sometimes 5 flaws also. 5 flaws also. Right? So again, the number of flaws is not constant. It keeps on varying from one glass sheet to another. Right? Because there is a lot of experimental variability. There is a lot of variability in the data. It's not exactly identical experiment. Something will change, okay, and your outcome changes. If you further expand on this problem, let's say historically the manufacturer knows that my manufacturing process hardly ever produces sheets with more than 3 inclusions per square meter. He knows that, oh, beyond 3 I rarely get such defects. This batch of 60 on one particular day has 3 such sheets, 2 with 4 inclusions and 1 with 5 inclusions. What happens for him? What are the economic implications? He or she is selling these 1 square meter glass sheets. So if the inclusions are 3 or less in number, then those sheets are acceptable to the customers, no issues. Customers will buy them unconditionally. If there are 4 inclusions in the sheet, marginally acceptable. He sells it in bulk, so the bulk customer will buy it as long as each batch of 1000 sheets does not contain more than 20 such sheets with 4 inclusions. Any sheet with 5 or more inclusions is not unacceptable. Person will return his sheet. So this is his end point. From the market side, these are the restrictions on him or the requirements on him. What does he do now for these 60 batches? Do we search and discard specific defective sheets? So is it that each and every sheet he goes through that optical scanner, scans the sheet and figures out, oh, this sheet has more than 4 or more than 5, I'm going to discard it? Does he do for each and every sheet, which is very costly, time consuming? Okay. Or he says, look, this batch which produced this 60 sheets, or this day when I produced this 60 sheets, something went wrong in my process, and hence I'm likely to have more defective sheets. I will not spend time in going and checking each sheet. I will rather discard the entire batch. Okay. That's a decision he has to make. A typical quality control problem. Do you throw away everything, or you go and keep checking each and every part which has been manufactured, okay, to figure out that there is some issue. So you keep hearing in the news sometimes these car manufacturing companies have recalls, right? So it's like they're discarding the batch. They feel that many cars made in that year or in that time will have similar defects. So they send advisories to customers, please go get your car replaced. Rather than going for each and every car and recalling it, checking it, spending time, they just put a blanket advisory for recall. So exactly similar problem here. So how do you make such a decision? Okay. Mathematically, if you put it in a mathematical language, if X star is the design value of the number of inclusions per square meter associated with the sheets produced by this process. If really I could, if I want that, okay, I don't want two defects, two inclusions per sheet, or let's say 3 or 4. Let's say if it's greater than 4, then I would say I will throw away the batch. So the question is there evidence, or let's say 3, is there evidence in this sample data that the number of defects is greater than 3? If it is, then I have to take steps to identify what is the source of this. Maybe something has gone wrong in my process. Maybe my pump has become old, it is malfunctioning, or my or my compressor is not performing well. Some temperature which was supposed to be 120 degrees centigrade is only going up to 110 degrees centigrade. Okay, because of whatever reason, because of some deposition, some loss of efficiency, fouling, etc. So he has to identify that. If he really feels that now as a batch, as a process itself, now X has become greater than X star, versus it is just a random phenomena. My process is all right, but just once in a while I get a value greater than X star. Okay, because of whatever, some uncontrolled reasons which are not in my control. If that is the case, he will live with it. But if it is the former, that there is a systematic change, okay, which has occurred in his process, then he has to go and rectify the problem in order to improve the process performance. So he has to make the decision. Is it the batch which is a faulty? He has to go and figure out what went wrong in the batch, or he just says, oh, 1 or 2, I don't care. These things keep happening. It's okay, I will continue. Okay. Also, you notice that here the defects is the count. 3 defects, 4 defects, or inclusions, 5 defects. It's a discrete random variable. It cannot take 4.1, 4.2, and so on. You could have random variables which can take continuous values, and you could also have random variables which are discrete in nature. Another problem of great interest, current time, so which is the problem is on efficacy of COVID vaccine. Okay, how do we know that COVID vaccine will work when it is being tested only on a few 10,000 people? World population is in billions. How does the company know it will work? How does the regulator approve vaccine? Okay. So how do we make a decision? Maybe is it just chance that it worked on 10 volunteers, or 10 people, or certain number of volunteers were given this dose, they didn't get COVID. Certain others who were not given, the placebo group, they got COVID. Is it just chance, or is it really got to do with the vaccine? How do we make such decisions? Is the difference in these two sets of samples, people who got COVID, people who did not get COVID, in whatever their volunteer group was, is that difference just chance? Okay, or is it really an effect of this systematic change which was introduced? Some people were given vaccine, some people were given placebo, some some pure water or something else. How do you make that decision? So again, if you look at the underlying now, there are claims. So hopefully the vaccine is coming for all of us. I mean, we're all eager to, especially for us teachers, we are doing all this in online mode without our students. So we're all eager to, at least I am eager to get back to my earlier teaching life. Students were our lifelines, being around students. Hopefully we can get there pretty soon now that the vaccines are coming. But to understand whether those vaccines work or not, to make inferences, some of the hypotheses need to be tested. Really what the regulator would want, the regulatory bodies, it's really, there is something called, if you can at least conceptually think that there is a true vaccine efficacy. If I could give the vaccine to each person in this world, I don't know, 5 billion, 6 billion, whatever is the world population, each and every person could be administered the vaccine, and then I know, oh, it worked for 60% people. That 60% is my vaccine efficacy true number, true value. But I have not given it to 6 billion. It's not possible before I introduce the vaccine anyway, and that will anyway take many years. I have to decide to whether to introduce the vaccine or not based on 30,000, 40,000 people. Okay, so I get some sample, some data, sample data, 30,000 people, compute some statistics, what fraction of that got COVID or did not get infected by COVID, and from that make some inference about the true vaccine efficacy. Okay, so some hypothesis testing has to be done. Really, I'm interested in, so the regulatory bodies will put some requirements that you have to just formally show us using the data that you have generated that the true vaccine efficacy. I don't know what the true value is because I don't have the full effect on the full population. But can you make statements that look, based on the data that I have collected, the true vaccine efficacy is at least 30%. So basically you pose an hypothesis and then say from data, I can accept that hypothesis or I reject that hypothesis. So there is a hypothesis testing involved. Okay, some minimum threshold is set and you have to ensure that the true vaccine efficacy is greater than threshold. Okay, some numbers were there in the news also. The CDC in US, they had said their leader, that Dr. Fauci, had put some number, I think that 50% or something. They said that if it works on 50% efficacy, if it has, we'll approve it. Okay, so some such numbers are there. So again, a very relevant problem, that it is not just that I will compute the average of what happened to these 30,000 people, but from that I want to make an inference of what will happen to the entire population. Okay, so again, a lot of analysis, data analysis, and have to be involved to make that inference. Okay, so these three types of problems are typical problems, very simple problems. So here the experiment is that you have collected some people and done some experiments on them. Okay, and now from that again you're making inference. In the manufacturing setting, it was some batches that you were running. So different settings, but similar problems, and hence similar steps to answer those problems. Okay, that is the core of a statistical analysis or statistical inferencing. Okay, so again, the random variable, in terms of random variable, like those YA or YB were random variables. The number of defects was a random variable. The number of inclusions in your glass sheet. Here, the observed vaccine efficacy is a random variable. If I do test on another 30,000 volunteers, my vaccine efficacy number will change. It's a random variable. Okay. If I could really, as I said, the truth is, if I could really do the experiment on the entire population of the world, then I will get the true vaccine efficacy. Okay, so to answer all these questions, we need to know the sample statistics. Sample statistics, again, summarize from a finite amount of data, which we call as a sample. You have computed some number, that's called a sample statistics. From that, we want to compute the distributions and properties of sample statistics. Ultimately, we want to say something about the true population parameters based on the computed sample statistics. In particular, we will build confidence intervals. We may not be able to exactly tell you what the true population value is, parameter value is, but I can say, oh, it is between 30 and 40. I want to, so that's what the CDC or the Indian regulatory body would want. Okay, you don't tell me the true vaccine efficacy, but guarantee to me that, or as reasonable as possible, I mean, with some confidence, guarantee to me that it is greater than 50%, it is greater than 60%, or it is greater than 30%. Okay, so give me some interval that I'm almost sure, 95% sure, 99% sure that the true value is in this band. Right, so that's the confidence interval. And a related topic is hypothesis testing on the true population parameter. Is the true value greater than 50 or less than 50? If it is greater than 50, I will take it. Less than 50, I will not approve it. Okay, so some alternatives you have to test. So you see the different settings. I may not know the exact value because I don't have access to the full population. Like the coin toss, I may not be able to figure out that the toss probability, the head probability is 0.5. I have come from Mars, done some 10, 20 coin tosses. But can I say that the head probability of getting a head in a toss is between 0.4 and 0.6? Okay, if it is greater than 0.4, I will say, this coin is okay, this coin is good. Okay, can I test some hypothesis that I don't know the true probability, but I'm pretty sure it is greater than 0.5 or it is less than 0.5. So different settings, different questions you can answer, and not necessarily, because you will never know the true value. what you have is just a finite sample. You will never exactly know the true value, but you can still answer such questions. Okay? You can only give an estimate of the true value from the sample statistics. But beyond that, you can also do this type of analysis, confidence interval and hypothesis testing, to make some more inferences. Okay, any questions so far before we move to the next slide? Are there any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, let me just go ahead.
Sir, Pradeep has raised his hand.
Yeah, so Pradeep, please ask your question. Yeah, you can ask your question, Pradeep. Okay, maybe he's. Yeah, it's okay. We'll continue, and in case there is something else, Prakash, let me know. Anybody else has a question? You can ask now before we go ahead. Okay, if there are no questions, then let's go ahead. So this is again, I'm repeating that slide, earlier slide, one of the earlier slides. So our setting is that we really wish to infer the parameters of a population distribution, like mean, variance, proportion of some random variable, okay, like the probability of getting a head in a coin toss. I really want to infer that. What I have is a statistic derived from the sample data. From 10 tosses, I know what was the fraction of heads I got. That's a statistic. Sample mean, sample variance, sample proportion, etc. So statistic is a random variable. So going from statistic to inferring the parameters of a population distribution, we need to understand what is the statistic behavior. What distribution does it follow? Okay. How is its distribution characterized? And if we can do that, then we can make this connection going from statistic finite sample to saying something about a population. Okay, typically population parameters, or what Professor Sharad talked about, the moments, for example, they are typically in Greek letters. For example, population mean, everybody remembers yesterday the expected value of X random variable, right? That is the mean, the average value or the mean value from the density function. That's like the population mean. Okay, that is indicated as mu. The variance, again, this is the second moment of the random variable. Moments you can compute only when you have the density function. Think of density function as the population. If you have density function, it's the same thing as having a population. Okay, so this is the second moment. This is what we want to estimate. Okay, what we have is a statistic from finite data. We denote those values as x bar, which is a sample mean. So 10 participants, their average height, that's x bar. Mu would be, if I knew everything about all the teachers in the country, I could find their average, that would be mu. From these 10 participants, I get x bar. Actually, I want to say something about mu. I'm not really interested in knowing the average height of just these 10 participants, because I pick another set of 10, that number changes. So I really want to say something about mu. What is the average height of teachers in the country? Okay, supposing I have such a question. Same way about sample variance. So statistics gives us x bar, s square. These two are called as statistics. Some quantities which you have computed from data. You really want to say something about the population parameters. In general, you will see that tomorrow when Professor Gudi talks of regression, you are going to estimate some parameter. The true value of the parameter will denote as theta. The estimated value, which comes from a finite sample, from few experiments, that is denoted as theta hat. So we distinguish between the two. Okay? So as an example, you want to fit a curve, the true curve y is equal to alpha x plus beta. Okay, supposing you are doing a conversion from centigrade to Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit is 9 by 5 C plus 32. So alpha is 9 by 5, beta is 32. Okay, that's how we have designed these Fahrenheit and centigrade scales. Supposing I don't know that, I just take two sensors, two temperature sensors. One gives me reading in centigrade, another gives me in Fahrenheit. I keep using those sensors on my body at different points in time. I collect some y and x data and try to figure out what is the slope, what is the intercept. I will not exactly get alpha and beta. I will get something else. Okay, because when I put those two temperatures, something keeps on changing in my body randomly. right? Is that the experiments are random in nature. So I will get estimates of alpha and beta, which I can call as A and B. So this is the thing that you have to keep in mind when you're doing experiments. You are not getting exact values of the true parameters. Rather, you are getting a number which is a function of the sample you have got. If you repeat the experiment, the truth does not change. 9 by 5 will not change, 32 will not change, no matter how many experiments I do. But what I compute A and B, that will change. Okay. So let's look at some very commonly used statistic is the sample mean or the sample average. Okay. And the idea can be extended to other types of statistics also. But let's just look at this simple case for our purpose. So I have a population with mean mu and variance sigma square. So this moments of your density function, you get some n values from this population. So think again of the heights of teachers in the country. They have some mean, some variance. I look at the heights of some 20 teachers. So I have these 20 numbers. Okay. I define the sample mean x bar is the average of the heights of those 20 people. That's what I will call as x bar. We want to now characterize this x bar. So this x bar is a random variable. Why is it a random variable? Because it's a function of the random variables x1 till xn. What are x1, x2? These are the heights of xi is the height of the ith chosen teacher. If I do another course or maybe tomorrow's session, some other 20 people I'll pick up. In some other course, some other 20 people. So my x1, x2 till xn will keep on changing. So they are random variables, right? Upfront, I don't know what is the height of the person I'm going to interact with. Okay. So this keeps on changing. As a result, every time I compute x bar, every day I compute x bar also changes. So it's also a random variable. Yeah. So we can ask, so as I said, our now aim is to characterize this. If this random variable, if it's a random variable, what is the model I can associate with it? What is the mean of this? What is the variance of this random variable? What is its density function of this random variable? Okay. So that is what we are trying to do, because once we do that, we can actually go back and make some meaningful inferences about mu, for example. A simple strategy, and you must be wondering why I'm talking of this. If I want to estimate mu, I'll say estimate is x bar. But I don't want to stop there. I want to say how accurate is that estimate. So based on that estimate, can I also give a valid range for mu? Because if I repeat the experiments, x bar changes. Will my estimate for mu change? Then it keeps on changing. Then I mean, how do I make sense of that? The true mu is just a constant, unknown constant, but it's a constant nevertheless. It's unknown, but it's a constant. So can I give some range for the true mu? Can I say for sure mu is greater than 5 feet? Okay. Can I say that with 99% confidence? So how do we give such answers? For that, we were trying to understand the behavior of this x bar. Okay. So x bar is a random variable, and now we can say, oh, what is its moment? What is its average value of x bar now? If you look at expectations, if individual observation has mean mu and variance sigma square, it is coming from a density function with mean mu and variance sigma square. If you look at x bar, you can show that x bar also has mean mu. What I mean to say is, if I were to do many experiments, thousands of experiments, every time taking 20 teachers, okay, randomly, taking their average height, and this I do 10,000 times, 1 million times, and average all those x bars, I will get the true mu, the true mean. Yes, in that sense, expected value of x bar is mu. Okay, so that is that's so in statistics, in probability statistics, we say that x bar is an unbiased estimator of mu. We use that to estimate mu. I mean, sample average, we always use it to estimate the population. In that YA, YB experiment which I showed you, one simple thing would be I look at all the batches A, get their rate, and say, oh, this is my estimate of the yield from catalyst A. Similarly, average of yields of B, that's my my estimate of the yield from catalyst B. Fine, we do that, but here we are saying, can you go beyond that? Because you repeat the experiments tomorrow again, these sample averages will change. One thing we are saying that if I repeat the experiments many times, then the average of these sample averages will be equal to the true mean. Okay, so this is what we say is an unbiased estimator of mu. So there's a general idea for a statistic theta hat to be unbiased estimator of theta. Its expected value should be the same as the unknown parameter, the two parameter theta. So in regression also we do want to do the same thing. It's about the procedure. If I repeat that procedure, repeat the process of getting samples, doing experiment, computing X bar, every time I get X bar, take their average, will I get back the truth? Okay. If it happens, we say it's an unbiased estimator. Okay. Okay. Also, every time I repeat the experiment, my X bar of course changes, right? Just a second, excuse me. So there is a fluctuation in X bar, just like there is a fluctuation in the height of individual teacher. I call out participant 1, he or she will have some height. Participant 2, he or she will have some height, and these heights deviate from the mean height. So there is some variance associated with each height. Same way, whatever X bar I compute has some variance associated with it. Every time X bar changes. Okay, every time X1 changes, X2 changes, X bar also changes. So I can also show that the variance in X bar, if the variance in individual observation, the heights variance of sigma square, the variance in X bar is sigma square by n. It's reduced by a factor 1 by n. Okay, so that is actually an important thing, that this X bar is so simple question I ask you, why did we have to take those again, that batch experiment, that the yield with catalyst A and catalyst B? Why do I have to do 30 experiments each? Why can't I just do one experiment with A, one experiment with B, and say, oh, whatever I get X A, that is my estimate of the mean with batch A, with catalyst A. Similarly for XB, what is the difference? Why do I have to do 30 and then take an average? The reason is this: whatever I will infer using the average will have lower variability around will have lower fluctuation. So I will get a more accurate estimate of the truth compared to just using one observation. In fact, you can see that this variability goes down as a function of n. If I double the n, the variability becomes less by a factor of a half. Okay, it reduces by half. So the larger the n, the lower the variability. Okay, so that's why I want to take bigger and bigger sample to collect more and more data, and it does help me. My X bar, the fluctuations in X bar start reducing, okay, around the mean. Average value is the true mu, which I don't know, but it will fluctuate when I compute it, but those fluctuations will decrease in magnitude because the variance is going down. Okay, so xi versus x bar, this slide gives just a summary that individual observation mean mu, the average also has mean mu, the variance was sigma square for individual observation, variance for the sample average is sigma square by n. So variance of sample mean decreases with increasing n. So sample more, increase the sample size and gain accuracy when using x bar as an estimate of mu. Okay, so the bigger the sample size of the volunteers in the vaccine trials, the more accurate estimate they will have of the true vaccine efficacy. Okay? I think that's where notions of phase 2, phase 3, etc. trial comes in. Okay. Yeah. So as n tends to infinity, the variance essentially becomes 0, sigma square by n, it becomes 0. So what it means is that the sample average converges to the true mean when n increases. Okay, but n has to go to infinity, it means I have to draw an infinite sample for it to exactly go and hit the mu. In practice, I will have only finite value of n. So we can now ask, what is the distribution of sample average? What we have got is its two moments. Its mean is mu, variance is sigma square by n. I don't know mu, that's what I'm after. I may or may not know sigma square. Okay, I really want to infer something about mu and sigma square from these sample averages, okay? And from the individual x1 till xn samples. So let's ask this question: what's the distribution of sample average? So there is a result which is called central limit theorem. I put it like a theorem, but actually it's quite intuitive when I look at the next slide. It's a very fundamental result in statistics and probability, which says the following: that if I take some random variables, it could be coin tosses. Okay, I'm doing some experiments. I'm tossing some, let's say, 10 coins. I'm doing this experiment many times. It could be anything. And x1 is the number of heads I have in 10 tosses. X2 is the number of heads. Again, I have in 10 tosses for the second set of 10 experiments, and so on. It could be any random variable. If I add them, okay, then if this n is large, so think of this as like a sample. If this n is large, then this summation behaves like a Gaussian random variable. I'm hoping Professor Sharad Bhatia talked about Gaussian random variable yesterday, the bell-shaped curve, okay, and it is very, very widely used in modeling the behavior of random variables. In fact, we as teachers, okay, a common conception is that the marks of our students, when we those of us who have the flexibility to award grades in our hands, okay, so when we allot them grades, the common conception is that, oh, you look at like a bell-shaped curve. Okay, you can think of the marks as a bell-shaped curve, a Gaussian curve. Okay, what is the reason why should be Gaussian? Because those marks are a function of multiple evaluations, like x1, x2 till xn, n evaluations you have conducted. Okay, so the resulting density function is Gaussian. Whether now it is or it is not depends on many factors. But what this result says is that if this n is large, for whatever n we are choosing, it may or may not be Gaussian for the problem at hand. But in general, if n is large, general statement, if n is large, then it does not matter what type of random variable x is, the sum will tend to be Gaussian. This is called as the central limit theorem. I'll illustrate it with an example in one of the next slides. Okay, so this is Gaussian with some mean n mu and variance n sigma square. Each of these random variables xi had mean mu and variance sigma square. So in notation, what we are saying is that for large n, x1 plus x2 till summation till xn is Gaussian with mean n mu and variance n sigma square. As a result, I can characterize, once this is accepted, I can tell you what is the probability of this sum being greater than 10 or being greater than 20 by using the probability computed from this density function, from a Gaussian density function. I hope Professor Sharad Bhatia talked about the relation that within a density function you compute the area under the density function that gives you the probability. So to the right of some number will give you the probability of getting a value greater than that number, and so on, right? Okay, so this is one of the most powerful results in probability, central limit theorem. And this is the reason why Gaussian random variables are used so widely in practice. These mathematicians, engineers, doctors, medicine, very widely used random variable because of the central limit theorem. Okay, it has some interesting history. It was actually proposed in 1733, so fairly old. Okay, it was proposed by the French mathematician de Moivre. However, it was forgotten. People didn't really realize its importance. Laplace published it in 1812. Okay, and he used this Gaussian density function to approximate a binomial related to coin tosses, where the outcomes are number of heads, number of tails, and so on. Binary, so not even continuous variables. He used a Gaussian to approximate a binomial using the central limit theorem. Okay. 1901, Lyapunov defined it in general terms and proved it formally, that if x could be any random variable, x1 plus x2 plus xn for sufficiently large n will tend towards a Gaussian random variable. He gave formal proof for it. Okay, so it has sound grounding behind it. So let's look at this example. Yeah.
Sir, excuse
Yes.
me, there is a question in the chat box.
Okay, yeah, please go ahead. Who has asked this question?
Vinod Kumar.
Vinodji, yeah, please ask your question.
He has written his question. The machine learning is nothing but statistics, probability, etc. Why the machine learning name is given to statistics?
Okay, so Vinodji, yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. So really, if you see this course, it says artificial intelligence and machine learning. So see, Personally, I think there is between data analysis, AI, and ML, there are only subtle differences. I mean, essentially techniques are common. I think data analysis typically has been used historically, at least for things like data visualization. I plot some data. Okay, I can generate mean, variance, mode, median, standard deviation. I just compute those statistics. What do I do with it? Okay, how do I use it? How do I use it to my benefit? That comes in part of machine learning. That now I can use the data to train some algorithm which will do some work for me. Okay, train, for example, a neural network, which will now I can use for property prediction, generate some model, regression model. So that's the machine learning part. Okay, you have gone beyond trying to summarize data and say, oh, mean of data is this, average is this, median is this is how it looks, this is the pie chart. You have gone beyond it and extracted some model using data. So that's the machine learning part. You have trained a machine, a computer, okay, a computer program to do something useful for you. AI is a more generic concept where that's like the holy grail of of researchers in this area, that we want to create machines which behave like humans. Okay, that's very generic topic, and you can say machine learning is part of that. Okay, so as such, the techniques which are used in AI and ML, there are so much variety of techniques out there. All of to understand them well, you need to know about the basic probability and statistics. Just by knowing probability and statistics, you will not necessarily know ML also. Okay, you will see whatever we are doing today. Of course, it is preliminary in nature; it is not exhaustive. But if I do a probability statistics course, doesn't mean that I will know how to train a neural network or I can generate a neural network. Okay, many, if you see these big companies, Google, etc., they are big time into deep learning, for example, using it to predict all sorts of things. So the ideas, the concepts are coming from probability statistics, but then you build a lot of tools on top of it to extract some useful, let's say, model for you. Okay, so what you will see tomorrow onwards, when we start looking at some linear regression, principal component analysis, okay, and neural networks, time series analysis, clustering. So things like classifiers, generating some rules for saying a person is Indian or a person is Chinese just by looking at the height. Can I generate a rule for it? That is like machine learning. I just feed in the height. My computer program tells me, oh, this person is Indian. Can I generate a rule which says, if I give you the demographic profile of a person, his height, weight, okay, what type of food eater that person is, vegetarian, non-vegetarian, where, okay, which part of country it belongs? Can you build a model will tell me that, oh, this vaccine will work for him or not work for him, or is susceptible to COVID or not susceptible to COVID? Okay, that's like a machine learning if you could build some tool for it. Yeah, and data analysis would be like, oh, you have done that, oh, so many people, I looked at the demography of so 1,000 people, 50 got COVID, 950 did not get COVID. Amongst these 50, these were their profiles. And so just analyzing data, right? So machine learning is building on top of probability and statistics. So yeah, so that's why this name is there. See, probability statistics that way have very ancient origins. They're as old as the maths itself, the discipline of mathematics itself. Machine learning is more recent phenomena, you can say, when we are using computers to automate some of the tasks. Okay, and that's where we're trying to build some, let's say, algorithmic models, extract models which are coming from the data. Fine. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Any
Yes,
other?
thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, see, these are at a fundamental level. Really, I mean, one has to understand probability and statistics before one can really understand machine learning. Of course, if you just want to use machine learning as a black box, there is some tool out there, you can use it. There are no functions available in pretty much any programming language, be it MATLAB, be it Python. Libraries are there. I can train a neural network. I can train a classifier. I can train a deep network. I'll give it some input, will give me some output. But to understand how that was developed, what are the limitations of that prediction? Okay, will it work? Will it not work? Can I take its prediction as absolute truth? How do I benchmark it? How do I evaluate it? How do I improve it? To be able to answer all of those questions, one needs to be able to understand probability and statistics. Okay, so these are really the building blocks. So that's why we are calling it preliminary material. We are not teaching any machine learning, but until unless we know a little bit about it, the rest of the course will appear like a black box that some magic is happening, which is not the purpose.
Sir, in
Yeah.
statistics also we will do training and prediction also we will do, no, sir? Statistics. Training we will
Sorry,
calculate the model parameters.
your voice is not very audible clearly. Is it? Can you speak a little loudly?
Is it okay, sir? Now it is okay.
Still little less audible, but maybe my let me increase my volume if it's a problem. Okay, yeah, my volume was less, speaker volume. Now please say, yeah.
Sir, in statistics also we will calculate the model parameters by training only, no, sir? By training.
Correct. From data we train, yes, correct. So that's what machine learning is. I collect data, from data I train some model. Okay, so that model could be you have chosen. Yeah, and then that model will do the prediction for me. Absolutely. So so see, the core is this is the statistic, basically, that if you can understand how to deal with data, what are the limitations of the data, when we are computing something from data, what does it mean, then rest of the things one can follow. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
See, right now, it's data is such a contemporary topic because we are looking at all these vaccines. The whole world is hopeful that no, a certain vaccine comes and it's going to work. And you hear these numbers, efficacy is 95%, somebody says 70%, somebody says it's greater than 50%, it's okay with me. Okay, how do you get these numbers? How do you show that your value is greater than 70%? You have only tested on 10,000 people. How will I know it will work on 1 lakh, 1 billion, right? So it is so important to understand some of these, at least for the regulatory bodies, to properly understand the data, because otherwise lives of people are at stake. You make wrong decisions and things go wrong and there are adverse reactions and whatnot, and it's really is as critical as it could be right now. So in that sense, it's a good time right now to be learning about it. Okay, but yeah, so our hope is then that from this course you get enough exposure. Statistics in some colleges, this what I'm teaching now, probability statistics, is probably part of the curriculum now. In our institute, it is part of the undergraduate curriculum. There is a core course on probability and statistics. Okay, and in many colleges, I know it is part of the curriculum. Machine learning is still not part of core, at least in chemical engineering. I'm talking of chemical engineering. In our institute, pretty much every department has a probability and statistics course. Machine learning in our department is still like an elective, a set of elective courses are there. But to understand them well, hopefully you will get exposure, you will get interested, you can read more. And machine learning, as I'm saying, really these days there are so many tools out there. You don't have to build a tool from scratch, but you have to be able to understand it and understand its limitations. That is very key thing. Otherwise, the problem is we start thinking, I have a neural network, it will give me a prediction perfect, 100%. It will correctly predict everything all the time. That's where trouble starts coming. Okay, so need to understand its limitation. Okay, so I was illustrating the central limit theorem. What this says is that if I add x1, x2 till xn, n is large, then the sum will behave like a Gaussian random variable, irrespective of how individual x behaves. Okay, so as an example, supposing I throw a dice. Okay, I throw one dice. It has dice number from 1 to 6 on its 6 faces. What is the probability density function for this? I can get outcome as 1. What is the probability of that? 1 by 6. Outcome 2, 1 by 6. Outcome 3, probability 1 by 6, and so on. I can get numbers 1 to 6 with equal probabilities of 1 by 6. That is what is sketched here. N is equal to 1. We are just looking at outcome of one die. Okay, this is probability density function. You can say we have just joined it by a line. It's actually discrete values 1 till 6. Okay, each probability is 1 by 6, which is around 0.16. Right, so this is how its density function, or if a discrete case we call it mass function. This is how it looks like. Let me now do an experiment where I toss two dice and then add their outcomes. Now can you tell me what is the probability of getting a number? Can I write on this? No. Let me just go to my OneNote. Yeah. Can you see my screen, Om Prakash? My OneNote is visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So now I am throwing 2 dice. I get outcome from the first die throw, I call it x1. Outcome from the second die throw, I'll call it x2. What is the probability that I will get this sum as 1? What is the probability that I will get sum as 1 when I look at the numbers in 2 dice, which I have shown? What is the probability that I'll get number outcome as 1? Can anybody answer? So to get 1 of them should be 1, other should be 0. That is not possible. My numbers on the faces are 1 to 6. This probability is 0. So this is the outcome, and correspondingly I have the probability. This is 0. Earlier for x1 alone, the outcome 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all of them had equal probability of 1 by 6, right? Now I am again computing the probability for different outcomes, and you will see some interesting thing happening. What is the probability that I will get an outcome 2? The sum of the numbers in the 2 die throw will be 2. To get 2, the only way is I should get 1 in x1, 1 as x2. What is that probability? Total, how many combinations are there? When you're throwing 2 dice, there are 36 combinations, 6 outcomes in die 1, 6 outcome in die 2, in dice 2, dice 1 and dice 2, 6 outcomes each, 36 combinations. Of that, only one combination will give you sum 2, right? So this probability is 1 by 36. What is the probability that I'll get a sum 3? Sum 3 I can get if I get 1 plus 2 or 2 plus 1. So there are 2 outcomes out of 36. So this probability is 2 by 36, which is 1 by 18. And you can see that now these numbers are changing. Okay, and this probability is actually increasing. If I go for 4, there will be more outcomes. 1, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1. There are 3 outcomes. The probability is 3 by 36, which is by 12, right? And I can go on. I'll get up to, I can get sum as 12, 6, 6 in both. Okay, so the probabilities will increase, and then it will, after a point, will start decreasing, right? And I can now repeat this experiment. What if I add outcomes from 3 dice, x1 plus x2 plus x3? Each individual dice has this behavior like x1, what is shown over here. But when I add them and look at the density function of this summation, you can see that the summation behaves differently. So that is what I have in the slides. Okay, I hope you can see my slides again. Let me go to the full screen mode. This was the density function when I had 1 dice. When I throw 2 dice, I add them. This is how my density function looks like. I don't get a probability of getting a value of 1 is 0. From 2 onwards, it starts and it goes up to 12. And you see it behaves, looks like triangular. Okay. If I go to 3 dice, and you can repeat this experiment. If you again do this 3, what is the variation in 3? It will go from 3. Minimum number you can get is 3. Maximum you can get is 18. 6 plus 6 plus 6. Between 3 and 18, you have the probabilities, non-zero probabilities. And this is how the density function will look like. N is equal to 3. You can see it's pretty much looking like a bell-shaped curve or Gaussian curve, Gaussian random variable, Gaussian density function. Right? N equal to 4, it becomes even more Gaussian. Okay? And n equal to 7, by the time you come to n equal to 7, you will not be able to distinguish it from a Gaussian at all. Okay, it looks pretty much exactly Gaussian. So that is what central limit theorem was telling us. It doesn't matter how individual dice behave, how individual outcome behaves. If you add enough of them, then the resulting behavior of this summation of the summed value is Gaussian. Now, when we do sample averages, it doesn't matter what your individual heights are. Okay, how your individual heights are behaving, whether they are coming from some uniform distribution, something else. If I average heights of 10 participants, that averaged value, that summed value will behave as Gaussian. It will become even more Gaussian if I start averaging heights of 20 participants at a time. My sample size increases to 20, 30, 40. It becomes even more and more Gaussian. I know that is guaranteed from central limit theorem. Okay? That is what this is illustrating. The central limit theorem is a very powerful result because of which we can use Gaussian density to model a lot of phenomena where we don't really know the true behavior. But I know it's a combination of many different random variables. I'll say, oh, let me put it as a Gaussian. Okay. So now because of this, whenever I compute the mean, what is the mean? X1 plus X2 plus Xn divided by n. That will also be this X1 plus X2 plus Xn is Gaussian. When I take its average, that is also a Gaussian behavior. So X bar has a Gaussian behavior, and we have already said its mean is mu, the original population mean, and its variance is sigma squared by n. Okay. So we have the nice result that the distribution of this sampling statistic, what is X bar? It's a sample statistic. Remember that batch problem? I have done 30 experiments with A. I take their average. That average value has a Gaussian distribution with what mean? The true mean, the true yield with catalyst A. Of course, I don't know that. That's what I want to estimate. And there is some variability inherent in that batch. Okay. So that is sigma squared, and n is the number of experiments I averaged, number of batches I averaged, 20 or 30. Okay. So I get a distribution this X bar. This is first step. This is really the first step in being able to make an informed opinion, informed decisions about this mu. Is mu between 10 and 20? Is it greater than 74.5? Is mu A minus mu B greater than 2? To answer those questions, really I want those questions on mu. What I'm getting is X1, X2 till Xn. From that I get X bar, and if I characterize X bar, I'll be able to answer those questions on mu. That's the chain or sequence of steps that one has to go through. So characterizing X bar, a sample statistic, is the first step. Okay. And this is just the sample average. You could talk of what is the distribution of the sample variance, what is the distribution of the median, of the mode, anything you can ask for, and it may or may not be tractable in the sense that analytically we may or may not be able to compute it easily. But yes, in principle, this can be done. And again, why are we doing all of this? Remember the context. We are doing all of this because I'm not really interested in that sample average alone. A sample average is 75, somebody else is 75.2. Can I say because 75 is greater than 75.2, A is necessarily better than B? That may be just chance. I really want to say mu A is greater than mu B. Okay. Can I say that with good confidence, with good probability, with good conviction? If yes, then I will shift to process A. Otherwise, I'll stay with B. Yeah. So to be able to make those statements, we are trying to characterize the sample statistic. In this case, the sample average as an illustration. Okay. I think I have a code I can just show you quickly before we break. So yesterday, I think Professor Sharad used Octave. So I have also just written a very simple code on illustration of the central limit theorem in Octave. Okay, it is. I hope you can see my screen. It's a very small code. We'll share all these codes with you. It is just for playing as a fun activity. What we are doing is we are sampling data from a uniform distribution in the interval 0 to 1. Uniform distribution is a flat distribution, equal probability of every equi-space interval in 0 to 1. We generate data from that. Okay, we take 10 values, we generate sets of 10 values, average them. Again, sets of 10 values, average them. This experiment we do 100 times. And now I look at the behavior of these 100 averages. Each average is from 10 samples. N is equal to 10, small n equal to 10, the sample size. But I'm repeating the experiment 100 times. Okay, these sets of experiments 100 times. And what our central limit theorem says is that these 100 averages which I will get, they will have a Gaussian distribution, even though the original data did not have a Gaussian distribution. In fact, it was coming from a flat distribution. Okay, so that's the step. I'm generating data from a uniform distribution, a flat distribution. I'm taking the averages of these small n, 10 values at a time. So I have 100 such averages. Okay, so X bar has 100 such values. And then I just plot a histogram. histogram of the raw data and histogram of the averages of these averages. Each average is based on 10 numbers. If I were to run this is how it will look like. What you see here is figure 1 and figure 2. This is how the raw data looks like. So I had 10,000 values coming from a uniform distribution between 0 and 1. This is the histogram. Right? Histogram is telling you in a particular bin how many observations fell in that bin. It should be flat. If I had infinite data, this would be completely flat because that's its density function. I have finite data, so there are some variations, but pretty much appears flat. Right? What you see on this figure 2, the right side figure, is the histogram of averages of n samples, 10 samples each. And this looks something like a Gaussian. You can see that my average never goes below 0.3 and does not go above 0.8 for this set of realizations. Repeat the experiment. These histogram will change. Okay, but roughly you'll again look at a Gaussian random variable, Gaussian histogram. If I increase n, this will become even more Gaussian. Instead of averaging 10, let me average 20 or let me average 50 samples at a time. N has increased, so it should look more Gaussian. If I were to read the code, figure 1 is the same and figure 2 starts looking even more Gaussian. Okay, figure 1 is similar in nature. It changes because there might be some randomness. Yeah, I have generated more data points, so of course it will change. It's not the same thing, but it looks more Gaussian, the second one. If I decrease n, if I just say I will average 2 data points at a time, two observations, it will look less Gaussian. It will look pretty much like the original data. Okay, if you now look at figure 2, it is still better than the raw data, but it is still looking better than the raw data. But as you average, as you increase n, it starts becoming more and more Gaussian. Okay, that's central limit theorem for you. And I could have sampled from any density function, not just a uniform. It could have been any type of density function. When I do the average, as if I keep this n large enough, that's what central limit theorem says, the sample averages will start looking like Gaussian. So very, very powerful result. Okay. Yeah. So maybe after, let's say, yeah, maybe we can stop after this slide. What this slide shows is the density function. So of course, there again, we were just illustrating on some 100 realizations or 1,000 times we did the experiments, every time looking at 10 observations. If you could do the experiments infinite times, then I'll get this type of curve. The original data here is coming from a Gaussian random variable. This is x bar. Its variance becomes 1 by n. The original variance was 1. And as n increases, you can see that this density function becomes sharper and sharper, which means that if I were to make inferences about the central value, which is the population mean mu, I'll get better inferences larger the n. Okay, that essentially is what we will see the take-home message is, as we will see later on. Okay. So yeah, we can stop here. This is is it time now? Yeah, it's 6:35. It's a good point to stop. Anybody has any questions? Anybody has a question? I will stop sharing my screen. Okay, there is, I can see in the chat box, there is a question which says that will the video links be shared? Yes, Ravinderji, I think it should be shared. We have been asked to record. I think these will be shared. In fact, my understanding is there is a plan to even put these videos on YouTube. Okay, so yeah, that link will be given to you by our organizing team. We'll be passing on the videos to them. Okay, so you can get in touch with them in case of any issues. Any other question anybody has? So please, if you have any doubt, please ask. No question is trivial. Okay, every question, in fact, sometimes the simplest questions add the most value. Every question is welcome and useful for all, including me. So please ask freely. Yeah. So if there are no questions, then maybe we can take a break and we'll be back at 7. Is that fine? Okay, so I'll stop the recording for now.